Welcome to the podcast. Today we're diving into the discussion of John Mearsheimer's perspective on what's unfolding in Gaza, specifically his framing of it as a genocide that the West has been deceived into supporting.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense take, right? So we're talking about how Mearsheimer asserts that what's happening in Gaza qualifies as genocide and that the US should basically have nothing to do with it.
Exactly, and it's interesting because Mearsheimer goes all in on the idea that Western policies, particularly American foreign policy, have been manipulated by a powerful, lobby that champions Israel's interests. He questions the entire narrative that the public is fed.
Right, and he really challenges the notion that the actions in Gaza are somehow justified by security or self-defense, calling them outright genocide, which is a stark claim.
Yeah, yep. And what's compelling is that he ties this argument to the larger context of how the West, especially the US, has been misled by a sort of, ideological framing that positions support for Israel as morally correct.
And he points out that this deception isn't accidental, it's systemic. The whole narrative seems designed to obscure actions that, frankly, amount to the large-scale suffering of Palestinians.
Absolutely, it's like a two-step dance. First, you have the framing of events in Gaza in a way that downplays or even hides the atrocities. And then you have the political machinery that amplifies a counter-narrative which is more palatable to Western audiences.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of machinery, doesn't Mearsheimer also delve into how the Israel lobby has really maintained its grip on Western foreign policy decisions?
Yes, he does. He is very critical about how the Israel lobby has managed to push its agenda so deeply into policy-making circles. It's like they've created an ecosystem where dissent or even criticism is shunned.
But isn't it a bit of a stretch to say that this lobby is solely responsible for what he calls the Western deception? I mean, surely there are layers of complicity, historical alliances, and geopolitical interests in play?
Sure, there's definitely nuance here, and while Mearsheimer zeroes in on the lobby, he also exposes a broader systemic issue. It's not just about one group pulling strings, it's about a network of interests that, in his view, create a framework to justify what he sees as basically support for genocide.
Yeah, I see that. Right. And what's fascinating is how he juxtaposes historical narratives with modern policy. He draws parallels between ancient regional dynamics and the present-day geopolitical strategies.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, the roots of these conflicts, they run deep. And then he reconnects that with how modern media and political elites, intentionally or not, shape the discourse. It's kind of like a theatrical script with predetermined roles.
And that brings up an interesting point. How does one separate genuine security concerns from political exploitation? Mearsheimer seems to argue that what's presented as security is, in effect, a smokescreen for some deeply flawed moral decisions.
Definitely. It's almost paradoxical. On one hand, there's the rhetoric of protecting democratic values, and on the other, there's the harsh reality of what he calls the Palestinian genocide. It's like, using the language of security to sanitize a completely brutal situation.
That's a good point. Yeah, and that rhetoric has really influenced public opinion, which is why many in the West might not see the full picture. What do you think of the way he positions the US in this debate?
He's pretty blunt about it. The US is painted as a kind of unwitting accomplice in perpetuating the massacre. He argues that by being so intertwined with Israel's interests, the US ends up supporting actions that many would ethically reject if they had a fuller understanding.
Right, though I wonder, isn't that a bit too black and white? I mean, wanting to protect allies while also condemning atrocities creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that might not be easily resolved.
True, and that's where the challenge lies. Mearsheimer's argument pushes us to rethink long-held assumptions. Even if his conclusions might seem stark, they force the public to re-examine the narratives we accept without critical scrutiny.
Yes, indeed. And I guess part of the discussion is also about accountability. If the actions in Gaza are indeed genocide, then what responsibility do Western governments bear in either enabling or challenging that narrative?
Absolutely, it's a call for accountability on multiple levels, both for the direct actors on the ground and for the powers behind the scenes shaping policy and public opinion. It's like if you're playing a role in a tragic drama, you can't just wash
For
your hands
sure.
of it.
Now, something that always gets me is how do you ensure that criticism of these policies doesn't get dismissed as anti Semitism or something similar? I know Mearsheimer's stance is controversial, but isn't that a dangerous tightrope to walk?
Yeah, it is. Mearsheimer himself contends that there's been a systematic shutdown of criticism and that any dissenting view is quickly categorized in a way that stifles debate. It's a delicate balance because legitimate criticism of policies should never be conflated with hate speech, but in practice, it's often blurred.
Yeah, exactly. So, in a way, his commentary is a double edged sword, challenging the status quo on one hand, while potentially inciting backlash on the other.
Right. And this brings us to the broader conversation about media narratives, how certain voices get amplified while others are silenced. Mearsheimer is essentially arguing that this amplification is what helps sustain the so called deception in the West.
And isn't it interesting how platforms like Tucker Carlson's show become a megaphone for these controversial views? It's like there's, an endless cycle of consumption and reinforcement.
Yeah, it's like a feedback loop where the same ideas keep getting reiterated until, well, they seem like common sense. And yet, if you peel back the layers, there's a complex web of interests at play.
Yep, that's true. And speaking of layers, what strikes me is how this discussion, which seems rooted in current events, is intimately tied to historical narratives, the roots of the conflict dating back decades, even centuries.
Exactly. It's like you can't really understand the present without taking a deep dive into the past. And Mearsheimer does that by tying historical dynamics to modern policy decisions. It's like he's constructing a bridge from ancient grievances all the way to today's geopolitical maneuvers.
And that historical perspective is essential because it forces us to question not just what's happening, but why it's happening in such a resilient, recurring fashion.
Right. And it leaves us to wonder about the future. If Western powers continue down this path of strategic alliances and selective outrage, then what sort of international accountability mechanisms will ever come into
Yeah,
play?
that's a big question. It really is. And on a final note, I think the conversation we're having here is in itself a call to be more critically engaged with the information we're presented.
Absolutely. Whether one agrees fully with Mearsheimer or not, his analysis invites us to dig deeper, question more, and kind of stop accepting narratives at face value. It's a reminder that behind every headline and every soundbite, there's a whole intricate story that often gets sacrificed in the
Well
rush
said.
for consensus.
And while we might respectfully challenge some of his points, like the oversimplification of a very complex situation, it's hard to deny that his framing sparks the kind of debate we desperately need in today's media landscape.
Exactly. So, whether you're tuned in to Tucker Carlson's show or any other outlet, it's clear that these discussions are not only relevant, they're, well, urgent. They force us to reconsider and re examine what we think we know about conflict, power, and the narratives that shape our
Yep,
world.
very definitely. So, as we wrap this up, any last thoughts on how we can, as listeners, become more discerning consumers of news and analysis?
I think it's about seeking multiple perspectives, engaging critically, and not shying away from uncomfortable questions. If we notice that certain narratives are being repeated without critique, maybe it's time to dig into the history and the biases
Right,
behind
exactly.
them.
And also, acknowledging that our interpretations might evolve as we learn more, being open to challenge is a strength rather than a weakness.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us today, folks.